All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for the privilege of looking at risk. And we realize as Christians, there's a sense in which we don't run any risks because of the sovereignty of God. And yet we don't have the vantage point of the eternal, omniscient God. And so it becomes a question of trust for us. And it also becomes a question of understanding degrees of risk in our culture as opposed to other cultures around the world. And I just thank you for the observations we can make and what we can learn. And I pray that these things will be helpful to us, even if we don't minister in other cultures in the future, just knowing that the differences exist, that you would help us to be able to understand more fully how these elements of culture influence us in our understanding of your word and the teaching of it in our ministries. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're at number 4, I think, on the notes, and we're going to talk about history. And I probably have mentioned this before. If not, I'll say it here. You really are never going to succeed in understanding any culture, including your own, if you don't understand something about history. When I was in school, I was not a big history fan. It's kind of funny. I don't know if it's still this way, but when I was in high school, typically the girls liked history and the guys didn't. I have no idea why that was. My basketball coach actually taught history, and he did a good job. But I'll just confess to you that I did not get a handle on history like I should have. And I've tried to make up for that somewhat in listening to, great courses, lectures and things like that. But history is important. So, not just history, but going along with history is geography. So what 2 countries do we have here? You should know these 2, right? Italy and China, right? So what do they have in common when it comes to studying the subject of risk? All right, so historically, the Roman Empire, in your notes, had a unique system of codified laws. Like it or not, our culture today, our political system, reflects a lot of what was embedded in the Roman Empire. It's just the way it is. Can we go back farther than the Roman Empire? Well, yeah, the whole idea of democracy really came out of what culture? Who really gave the acid test to the democratic idea? Greece, Athens specifically. We talk about Athenian democracy. I just finished a great course about the Athenian democracy, and one of the things that the gentleman points out there is that our brand of democracy is not the same as the Athenian brand of democracy, but the concepts are still, common. So what the Roman Empire did, and remember that the Roman Empire did it on the shoulders of the Greek Empire. Rome didn't come in and just completely install, a different way of doing things. They adopted the Greek language. Why? I mean, if the world is already unified in one language, then, why reinvent the wheel? It was to the Romans' advantage to preserve the unity of language in the world. And then the whole idea of, the Greek democratic idea that trickled into the Roman Empire really influenced the way the Romans did their laws. Roman law was not the same as Greek law, but it was very much a continuation of what was related to the democratic ideas of the Greeks. So it's fascinating. It's almost overwhelming when you think of how much there is to study and learn about these things. But the codified law, now, does codified law strike you as high risk or low risk when you hear that phrase? Yeah, it's low risk, right? And the more laws, the more specific those laws, the lower the risk, right? So, China. Now again, China is a bit of an anomaly. Because of its size and its long history, it's one of the oldest nations on earth. It's really difficult to pin it down and say it's high risk or low risk. China believed in a government of man and encouraged innovations. Does that sound like the China we know today? No, today the Chinese government is very much a totalitarian government, right? They're calling the shots on everything, and they censor, they decide, what they want to get out to the rest of the world and what doesn't get out. And so, but that is not always the way China functioned. And so when we say that China was high risk, more high risk, that's part of the reason. Even though today it's totalitarian, there's a lot of control, it would be much more low risk from a political vantage point. But in its roots, going back centuries, China was actually a country that encouraged innovation. In fact, that almost sounds like the West. A government of man that encourages innovation. That sounds Western, but it's not China's reality today. So understanding the historical background is important. I think all of us understand that it would be very superficial to say, that a country today is what it's always been. And if it's not, we need to understand why. All right, so what about the issue of group participation, number 5? How does uncertainty avoidance affect it? So, in a low risk environment, a question like, what do you think, creates good discussion. This is low uncertainty avoidance. Sorry, not low risk. Remember, don't get those confused. Low uncertainty avoidance is the same as what? High risk. So where risk is, more welcomed, then opinions of people will be more welcome. A question like, what do you think, creates good discussion. Now, why does that question, what do you think, represent a low uncertainty avoidance or high risk culture? Yeah, Emma?
Someone's not afraid to voice their opinions.
But why does that represent high risk? Okay, for you perhaps as an individual to put yourself out there, you could create a reputation, but also from the vantage point of the society itself, what is the potential risk of letting people talk? You're right. Looking at it, I mean, what your statement has to do with the person himself. It could be risky for the individual who talks because he can get labeled really quick. But as it relates to the group,
yeah, I guess new ideas could be brought in that, maybe as a group they want to be like, oh, this is how we've done things, or so it can bring about change. Okay,
all right, yes, exactly. Paul?
Well, in business side, that type of question kind of gives the employees kind of to give their thoughts on how the company is functioning, what it can implement and what it can't.
Okay. All right, very good. So the more you allow people to interact and interject their ideas, the less control the leadership maintains. That make sense? Because people influence. People who are good and good thinkers and good communicators influence others. And one of the things you find in a totalitarian government that's very, very low risk is that you do not want people influencing people. You want all of the influence to come from the top. And when people down here start influencing on a grassroots level, it turns out it becomes a threat for those who are in positions of high authority. So, in our culture, one of the things that we have championed over the years, I thought that was on, I'm sorry. One of the things we have championed over the years is the value of people's opinions. Okay. In fact, most newspapers around our country have had some section in the back or someplace called something like the opinion pages, right? Where people can say what they think, and in a protected way. So people are willing to offer opinion even if it ends up being shot down. For a lot of people, okay, if I get shot down, I get shot down, but at least I said what I believed. That's welcome in a higher risk society. So a democracy, in general, would be more high risk than totalitarian. In a high uncertainty avoidance or low risk culture, the same kind of question brings silence. Okay. Number one, if I were in a very low risk culture, I probably wouldn't even ask for your opinion. in the first place? And if I did, your tendency would be to say, I'm not sticking my neck in a noose. I'm not going to speak up. So people will tend to be more quiet. All right. Questions about that? Does that make sense? All right. And we should always be thankful to God that we are privileged to live in a society where we are still allowed to speak up. There are people in our culture who are trying to change that. And the way they're trying to change it is to make you look like a threat to society if you speak up as a conservative. Hate crimes, you know, you're on the wrong side of history, you're behind the times, you're impeding progress. All those types of things are out there. They can't stop you from speaking, you know, directly, but they try to use those manipulations to shut you down, to scare you, to threaten you, you know. Power distance, and this should make sense, and uncertainty avoidance usually go together. And of course, here's that identity thing that always shows up. It's, you know, the biggest influence of all. So a high uncertainty avoidance goes along with high power distance, because the higher up the power, the less other people contribute, right? And all the decisions come from right here. That is understood to be low risk, okay? And then that usually is true in a collectivistic society. So I hope you're seeing how these all kind of work together. And again, it's not an exact science. It's always a moving target, but that in general would be true. All right. Okay, let's talk about the workplace. How many of you work a job where you have team meetings, company meetings where you're allowed to interject? Or maybe you have. Anybody? Okay, Ella, what kind of job?
I work in a nursing home, and every day at shift change, you'll get reports on how all the patients are doing. And a lot of times, if there's something like going on with them, like as CNAs, we're with the people most of anyone else. So the nurses will ask us for our input, even though like we're not qualified to give like nursing information, I guess. Like they still ask for our opinions.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, yeah, medically, there are certain things that you're not qualified to say, and then you have the HIPAA laws, right, also.
But that's more like with outsiders, like people who aren't the patients, like you can't share medical information.
Okay.
But I'm saying, like, if someone's having some sort of, like, medical issue, something's going on, the nurse asks, well, what do you think I should do?
Yeah.
Even though they're, like, nursing procedures that, like, CNAs can't do.
Okay, interesting. They'll ask your opinion. Are you a CNA? Yeah. So that reflects two of these, right? Two of these cultural dimensions, these values. One is more of a low power distance. In a very high power distance environment, she probably, or he, or whoever it is, probably wouldn't even ask for your opinion. And it also reflects the idea of high risk. By asking your opinion, action may be taken reflecting what you think should be done. And if it's a wrong decision, I'm not saying that you'd make it wrong, but if it, you know, if it did turn out to be wrong, then that presents a risk for the person in authority. Anybody else had a job like that where your opinion was welcome or expected? Jules, where at?
I worked at Fairway, and we would have team meetings, and if anyone had an opinion, they were able to say it, and then the bosses were able to consider it or explain why we do something.
Okay. Now, if you're thinking here, tracking this, there is a sense in which that could be either high risk or low risk. It could be high risk in the sense that, you know, the subordinates are allowed to chime in, and that could create, you know, distrust or dissatisfaction among the employees. That would pose a risk. But on the other hand, it's also low risk because there's, in our culture, allowing people to share their opinions actually is a measure of security in one sense. In other words, it allows us to see what's going on out there. It makes us better informed as leaders as to what's happening in the workplace. And that is low risk. So do you understand what I'm saying? You can see it as high risk or low risk if you look at it from those two vantage points. Make sense? Clear as mud. All right, here we go. In the workplace, high uncertainty avoidance, letter A. Number 1, strict confidentiality dominates. People are very careful about where and when to discuss work. Even in our culture, that happens to some degree, depending on what kind of job you have. You want to be careful sometimes about what you say. Anybody here work for Hy-Vee, PDI, or any of those? A few months ago, they went through a bit of a wrinkle in their administration. Some things were happening in corporate, up in the upper echelons of the company. And at one point, I think it was Channel 8, interviewed the CEO, Ediger is his last name. And he was a little bit frustrated by some of the things that were going on, and he made a statement in the news that kind of offended the news people. I don't remember now what the statement was. My son was working for the company at the time, not in corporate, and the statement he made resonated a little bit, and there was a ripple effect. And for a while at least, Hy-Vee kind of suffered a little bit of a bad reputation, here locally. Hy-Vee has had a history of, high integrity, very, very respected company. But when this happened, it created a ripple effect. And I think things are better now. I've talked to some people. But there's a case where somebody spoke, to the media, which is probably, if there's any place you don't want to mess up, is if you're being interviewed, if there's a mic in your mouth, with somebody, a reporter on the other side of that mic. You know, be really, really careful. And so, there's a case that even in a high-risk country like ours, you have to be careful about what you say. All right. It's hard to introduce new ideas or products because people are very suspecting. That's interesting. What does that say about innovation? What does that do to innovation? Low-risk society, hard to introduce new ideas or products because people are very suspecting. So let's say you're a very innovative person. You're one of these people that just constantly has neat ideas, and what do you do in this situation? How does this affect you? Yeah, Delaney?
You're gonna have to make sure that your ideas or your products make a lot of sense and are really clearly vetted before you present them.
Yeah, and that's low risk, right? High uncertainty avoidance. Yeah, if you're going to open your mouth and suggest something new, you better make sure that you have the leadership, that your arguments, your ideas are well enough substantiated that you're not running the risk of being suspected as, well, what would you be suspected of? People are very suspecting. What do they suspect people of in a culture like this who are innovative? I know it's hard. We don't live in a culture like that. It's hard for us to imagine having a good idea and then, being shot down for it. But in a low uncertainty avoidance culture, try to imagine yourself being in that kind of a situation where, you're not at the top. Remember, there's that power distance coming into play too. What might people suspect you of? Yeah, Jules? Okay, they might suspect you of mutiny, wanting to taking over, Yeah. Or at the very least, they might accuse you of trying to gain points and move up at the expense of others. Yeah. Anything else come to mind? That's a good point. Yeah. And so you have to be very careful. Now remember, when we talk about collectivistic and individualistic, we said in a collectivistic culture, what's at the top of the pyramid? What?
Wait, did you say
Yeah,
collectivist?
yeah, in a collectivist culture, what's at the top of the pyramid?
The income?
Yeah, well, that's involved, yeah, social harmony in general, right. In an individualistic culture, what's at the top? Little review here. Maslow's pyramid. What's at the very top of that? Huh?
Oh, I said I am.
Well, yeah, exactly. Self-actualization, becoming what you can become, fulfilling your potential. That's our, right. So in a low-risk culture, there's a tendency to view somebody who shares innovative ideas as being, as upsetting social harmony. And what do you do when somebody starts upsetting social harmony in a collectivist? Yeah, bam, hit them back into place again. So people generally don't want to speak up because they don't want to be viewed as being out of step and creating disharmony in the group. So does innovation create disharmony? Sure it does. Think about it. Anytime you come up with something new that's good, that constitutes changes, right? And change always creates a little bit of it creates waves, right? Okay, but if you never have those, then there are companies, for example, that would manufacture certain products, and then those products would become obsolete. And so what do? They either close down their business, or they get on board with the changes, and they start making products that are in keeping with the changes. Yep. But let me interject this too, by the way. Let me ask you a question. Do you believe in what is sometimes referred to as inevitable progress in society? Inevitable progress. How does that statement strike you? Delaney?
What kind of progress is it talking
I'm being nebulous, but let me simplify a little bit. Let's talk for a moment about technology. Do you believe in the inevitable progress of technology? How many of you have purchased a cell phone that was worse than the one you had previously? Well, maybe you have. That does happen. In the West, progress technologically, and even in some other ways, in terms of health provision and things like that, has been such a reality over the last few hundred years that a lot of people who live in the West have really adopted subconsciously the attitude that things are going to get better. You think we have nice cell phones today? Wait till the next ones come out. You think we have nice homes, efficient homes now? Just wait 20 years now. Imagine. Look at the cars. Have you ever stopped to think, what's it going to be like, in the auto industry 20 years from now? What kind of a car will I have at that time? We are programmed as Westerners to think in terms of ultimate progress, right? And we have really experienced that. Think about the way things have progressed. Now, morally, okay, we could discuss that one, right? But what's happening in our culture right now is that anybody who is a conservative, anti-abortion, small government, you name it, anybody like that is being viewed by the loud liberal side through the media as being against progress. We are the ones that are slowing down progress. In the West, progress is an absolute necessity. The Western culture does not want to even imagine the possibility of going backwards. We have, the Western civilization has, in general, been a civilization of progress, okay? And so that's something that we need to keep in mind. Anyway, just a little bit of a rabbit trail, but it is happening, and we need to be aware of that. Number 3, employees stay longer in a company due to uncertainty about a job change. Anybody here ever not change jobs because you didn't know where you'd go to get a job? It can happen, but not that much. Normally in our culture, if you don't like your job, you don't like the pay, you don't like the people, you don't like the job itself, Normally you can say, hey, I'm going to put my 2 weeks notice in, I'm going to find something else, right? You could go almost anywhere in Ankeny and you see on all the doors, hiring, 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 hiring. Okay, but, and that represents more of a high-risk culture. You can leave your job, you can find something else. In a low-risk or high uncertainty avoidance culture, people will stay put because they don't want to run the risk of being left out in the cold. If I leave my job, where do I go? At least I have a job. Okay, some of that's driven economically. I realize that, but all right. Low uncertainty avoidance. So let's use the example of Australia. And we'll see later on in the semester that Australia is actually in the Anglo cluster of cultures that we study at that time. But let's use the example of Australia. Work is freely discussed in most any venue of society. Right? This is very high risk or low uncertainty avoidance. Innovations are freely expressed, even when one knows his or her idea may likely not be accepted. In fact, job security is often enhanced by a willingness to contribute ideas. There are some companies in the West, especially, where if you don't contribute your ideas, you're considered, dispensable. Yeah, she never says anything. He never says anything, and so do we really need them around here? We want people that have something to contribute. Okay? Have you ever taken a course where part of your grade is based on contribution in the class, participation? 5%, 10% of your final grade or whatever is going to be based on your participation in class. I don't do that, so don't worry. But it wouldn't be wrong in our cultural setting. If I told you 10% of your final grade is based on how much you participate in class, I would not be out of bounds because our culture welcomes that sort of thing. See? If I were teaching in Japan and I said that, it would fly in the face of everything they stand for. It's just different. All right. People often value the risk of seeking out a new and better job. Change is viewed as, and there's that word, progress. Progress. Let me ask you this. Does the Bible speak of the future more in terms of progress or regress? When the Bible looks ahead, is it progress or regress? It's kind of a trick question because there's more than one way to answer that. Yeah, Emma?
Yeah, it's definitely parts of both because our job as Christians is to progress people being saved in the church.
Mm-hmm.
But also it says that during as we get closer to the end times, the world will get worse.
Right.
So
can you think of a passage that says that just off the top?
no.
That's all right. Can anybody think of a passage? Your answer is correct. Can anybody think of a passage that actually prophesies a deterioration of society near the end? Anybody take Romans class with me? High risk. Romans 1? What about 2 Timothy chapter 4? In the last days, perilous times will come, right? Now, the reason it's a trick question is because ultimately, when you look at the big picture of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, ultimately, the end game of God is restoration. It's going to be success. It's going to be progress. But that happens when? When do you really see the restoration of things happening? Is it during the church age? The church is growing by God's grace. But where do you see global success and progress happening in the future? In the reign of Christ, the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ. Now, here's what's interesting. The 1,000-year reign of Christ takes place after what the Bible refers to as the times of the, what are we living in now? Daniel prophesied these, all of Daniel's prophecy, those first 69 weeks. You're right, the 70th week, but that all represents the times of the, well, tribulation is the 70th week, that's the last one, but collectively, all those 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy, what is the image that represents those 70 weeks? What was the dream? Remember, it was the image of the head of gold, and you got the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans, right? The Bible refers to all that as the times of the Gentiles. When Christ comes to reign, the times of the Gentiles will be history, because they end at the fulfillment of the 70th week. And so that's why it's a trick question. As long as we're living in the times of the Gentiles, ultimate and final progress will not happen. Now, yeah, we do have better phones now, and you see progress in certain ways. People live longer than they used to because of medical advances and things like that. But if we look at it globally and spiritually, it's a downward spin, and we see that happening in our country today. See, and so the answer to that question is progress inevitable? The answer is no. During the times of the Gentiles, but yes, ultimately. And that's where our hope as believers becomes really, really important. We are not tied to this life. We are strangers and pilgrims, but someday we will become part of God's kingdom, and true progress, restoration, and all of that will take place. That's our hope. Okay, so just kind of interesting trying to tie in what we believe with the kinds of observations we're making here. All right, we've got to move on. What about in the arts? Who are the artists here? Anybody consider yourself an artist? Okay. Jules, what kind?
I like to draw.
Cool. Pencil, paint, what do you like?
I like to use, it all just depends, but I mainly use like gel pens.
What, gel pens. Cool. Do you have anything online that you've drawn? Do you keep?
Not online, like I've done it online,
Mm-hmm.
but like online as in I posted about it.
Okay, cool. Cool. I'd like to see some of your work sometime. Who else? Yeah, what kind?
I just kind of, I do a lot more
With what?
realistic of just pencils.
Okay, cool. That's really neat. Anybody else? And that includes music, right? Okay, music's part of the arts, right? Has anybody been in Mrs. Witcher's office and seen the drawing that her son, not Tyler, but what's his name? Carter, that he's done? Yeah. And by the way, what is this thing? Yeah, it's a microphone. When I first, it's a stock photo. When I thought, what in the world is that? And then I looked and went, oh, it's a microphone. Okay. So what about the arts? This is cool. In a high uncertainty avoidance culture, you find a tendency toward precision. Why? Because the higher your uncertainty, the lower the risk, the more you want to depict something accurately. You don't want to run the risk of being wrong in your depiction of something. Does that make sense? So this is, is it a Da Vinci painting? Now I can't remember. But look at the precision. You could almost claim that to be a photo, right? The artist was very, very precise. Okay? and that's because you want to be careful. You're very low risk. You want to be careful not to misrepresent whatever you're displaying. That makes sense? So there it is. Pretty cool. Oh, by the way, Jules, when you draw, do you and Hadley, do you tend to be more precision oriented when you draw something, or do you tend to be a little bit more? I don't even know what word I want. A little bit less precise in the way that you display something, present something.
I'm more precise. I like it.
Okay, all right. And you too. All right, yeah. Now notice this. What's the difference between that and that? How would you describe the difference between those two paintings? Jules?
One's very realistic and has more detail. It looks like it would have spent a lot more time on it, and this one looks like they were like spending time on it, but they're not like taking a bunch of like weeks to do it.
Okay. I think, I'm not an artist, but that would be my impression. When I look at these two, I would probably say, boy, took a lot longer to do that one than that one. Now, is the real issue here time, how much time it takes? Is that really what's going on in the difference between these two?
There's time. Like for this one here, you see there's bright colors, but in my opinion, it will be easy for the person who drew the first picture to do this, and the person who drew this to do the first one will take them longer.
Okay, it would take longer. That I think probably we would all agree on. But my question is time the issue here, how long it takes, or is there something else going on in the thinking of the person? Delaney?
Is the issue, like, were these made at the same time, though? And, like, I don't know. There's more of an issue than uncertainty avoidance, right? Because there's older Europeans that it looks almost exactly like this, just
Mhm.
more toned down colors.
Yeah.
Would part of it also just be, like, resources available and, like, different use of information? That is odd.
Okay, to answer your first question, I don't think that the period of time is the essential difference here. Obviously, art does change in different eras, but I don't think that's probably the reason for this. Hannah, did you have your hand up first? Okay, Emma?
The first painters probably, like, trying to portray the image, but this person might be trying to say something about what they feel.
Okay.
Just like, I don't know, because they can display more about like what they're feeling or want the person looking at the painting to feel based on. Like,
Okay. All right. So this picture here, nobody's going to look at this picture and say that's what people actually look like. I mean, yeah, everybody has eyes, nose, and mouth, but nobody actually. Maybe you've met somebody that looks that way. I don't know, but I have a long nose, but not that pointed. So and look at, and there's no bridge basically, just whoosh, straight up. So nobody would look at that and say that's sloppy art. What they would say is the motivation behind this is the communication of an idea, and not so much the communication of precise characteristics like you see in the previous page. That makes sense? So the real question is, what's the motivation of the artist? Now, I'm not an artist, so I'm probably already talking out of turn here. But this artist is conveying an idea. And so this would be higher risk in the sense that he's running the risk of misrepresenting human being or a bird. But that's not a problem with this artist, because this artist is conveying a concept. Now, I don't know what concept he had in mind, but can you guess what comes at you from this painting that would well communicate an intention?
Kind of looked like my first idea was like harmony, and just looked like they look like they're all in different cultures and they're holding a bird, which could be like.
Yeah, definitely harmony, or we could use the word peace, right? It's tranquil, right? And I mean, that is beautifully communicated in a very imprecise expression of art. We're getting philosophically involved here in art. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. And so improvisation, which is related to the word imprecise, okay, has to do with communicating a concept. And even the colors that are used, they're warm, colors, I don't know if anybody here has ever done a study on the impact that different colors have. It's a fascinating study. There's quite a combination here. And this display of colors is very common in a culture like India. In fact, that's where this came from. If you walk into most any city in India, you will be immediately impressed by the colors. Not just the variation of different people, but even the various colors that a single person wears. Just, they love rich colors. And they're not showing off. It's just, it's part of their cultural expression. Okay. All right. People in low, I don't think this is in your notes. Okay. Did we miss something? Have we filled in all the blanks? Okay. People in low uncertainty avoidance or high risk countries are generally more relaxed, open, or inclusive. Okay. So, in general, of course, again, we're going to be stereotypical, but all right. Now, when interacting with a high uncertainty avoidance culture, and this is number 9 in your notes, okay, some suggestions. A, be precise and concrete. Okay, remember that painting, I think it's Rembrandt painting, was very precise. And what's the difference between abstract and concrete? We're using an important word here, concrete. What's the difference between those two? Jules?
One of them you can clearly see what the picture is, and abstract, like I think that's like what you feel this is, and different people can think of it in different ways.
Okay. All right. Yeah. As an illustration, let's talk about language for a second. English. Is the English language an abstract or a concrete language? Concrete. Okay. Now, think of what your definition of concrete. Why do you say concrete?
I was just thinking because, like, it's a written language and we have, like, grammar rules and certain things like that.
Okay, there is precision in that sense, right. I'm thinking more about the actual, I'm not thinking about the grammar right now, I'm actually thinking about the letters, the actual symbols that we put on the board. For example, the word book, okay, is that abstract or concrete? Justin, you had your hand up?
Oh, sorry.
Delaney?
Is it abstract and then something like Mandarin that's pictographic?
Yes. Yes. That's concrete. Yeah, concrete, and you're right, concrete means precise, but in language, a concrete language is a language whose actual symbols communicate pictures or something. For instance, here in this word, what does the B have to do with book? Nothing. The O, what's it mean? Is there something about the shape of any of these letters that looks like a book that communicates book? No, it's only the combination of all of these abstract symbols that create a concrete idea. Does that make sense? These symbols in and of themselves are abstract. The concrete idea comes from the combination of them, whereas in a language like Mandarin or Egyptian hieroglyphics and some of those pictorially, the actual symbols of the characters themselves communicate a concrete idea. So we say in a high uncertainty avoidance culture, low risk, we want to be concrete. In other words, we want to be very specific and make sure that we're communicating. And we're going to talk about communication later on. We'll come back to this idea. Does that make sense, everybody? Abstract and concrete, very important here. B, avoid ambiguous responses. Ambiguous is kind of more abstract. Let me just give you another challenge here, okay? Even when you're teaching Bible stories, all right? When you're teaching narrative in the Bible, our tendency in the West is to communicate Bible stories in an abstract way. What do I mean by abstract? We create outlines, bullet points, and many times we present even Bible narrative in outline analytical fashion. That would be abstract. Rather than just telling the story and not worrying about an outline and just allowing the story elements to come alive in and of themselves. Does that make sense? And I'm not against outlines, please don't misunderstand me, but I do think that in our culture, we have swung the pendulum far too far to the to the abstract, outline, analytical side, even when it comes to interpreting narrative in the Bible. Don't let narrative. I have a friend that wrote an outline of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And it's got like 4 main points. Every point's alliterated, all the sub-points. I'll have to pull it out sometime and show it to you. And you read that and you say, oh, that's cute, you know, all the alliteration, everything, and it makes sense because the outline perfectly depicts what happens in the story. But who would ever tell Goldilocks and the Three Bears by presenting an outline? You don't do that. See that? So I just want to encourage you, even in that way, be careful that you don't allow that to happen. Again, I'm not against outlines, but we got to be careful. Don't assume silence equals lack of self-confidence. Oh, this is, in a low-risk culture, we often falsely accuse people of being shy or backward or fearful or introverted or whatever. And that's just not right, okay? Usually, you know, they're really thinking, they're following you, but they're being very, very cautious about speaking up because, bam, they don't want to get, you know. And so if you go as a missionary to a country like this, and you're trying to encourage people to speak up and to share their ideas, you have to be very, very patient because by nature, they're going to be hesitant to do that. And then D, don't be offended by very detailed instructions. The higher the uncertainty avoidance, lower the risk. The more exact people want their instruction, just like the painting is more precise, more detailed. And then finally, we'll stop with this one. Avoid changing plans too many times. High uncertainty avoidance cultures don't like sudden change, okay? And if you're in a ministry where you're just full of ideas and you go into a church or someplace in a ministry and, man, you're just ready to overhaul this thing because this is out of date, be careful, okay? Be careful. This change often needs to come very slowly. All right, we'll stop there today, pick up that last bit and move into achievement next time. Thank you.